Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the soft, silken world of Heian, Japan, where cherry blossoms drift like snow and the art of silk weaving connects earth to heaven through the patient work of human hands. You're about to become an apprentice silk weaver in 10th century Kyoto, where the imperial court sets fashions that will echo through centuries, and every thread you spin carries the weight of tradition. Picture this. You are rematerializing just as the first pale light of dawn touches the curved rooftops of the ancient capital. The air smells of wood smoke and morning mist, and somewhere in the distance, temple bells are beginning their slow, bronze conversations across the valley. Just try not to invent the spinning wheel by accident, though honestly, your new master might appreciate the efficiency. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're re-listening from and what time it is in your world. Love seeing how this little time travel community spans the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a narrow earthen path, your bare feet already knowing the way to the wooden workshop that will become your second home. The morning air carries the faint sweetness of mulberry leaves and the earthy scent of silkworms at work. Your hands still your own, yet somehow already calloused in just the right places. Know the weight of bamboo trays and the gentle pressure needed to handle delicate cocoons. The workshop emerges from the morning mist like something from a painted scroll. Low wooden buildings with paper screens glowing softly from within, their peaked roofs dark against the lightning sky. Bamboo groves whisper secrets to the wind on either side of the path, and you can hear the soft rustling of thousands of tiny creatures beginning their daily feast. Your master, Yamamoto-san, slides open the workshop door with practiced silence. He's a man of perhaps 50 years, his hair pulled back in the traditional style. His movements as precise as the silk threads he'll teach you to create. His eyes hold the patience of someone who has watched 10,000 cocoons transform into beauty, and when he nods to you, it feels like receiving a small blessing. The silkworms do not wait for sleepy apprentices, he says, with a gentle humor that makes you suspect he was once sleepy himself. But then again, the best silk comes from those who understand the value of moving slowly. Inside the workshop, oil lamps cast dancing shadows across rows of bamboo trays, each one home to hundreds of silkworms in various stages of their remarkable transformation. The sound is unlike anything you've ever heard, a gentle, continuous rustling like rice being poured into baskets, punctuated by the soft whisper of mulberry leaves being devoured by countless tiny mouths. You wonder what your old world would think of this patient craft, where a single kimono might require the cocoons of 3,000 silk, each one tended with the care most people reserve for precious jewels. Here in Heian, Japan, silk isn't just fabric, it's poetry made tangible, seasons captured in thread, the very essence of refinement woven into something you can wrap around your shoulders on a cold morning. The workshop smells of mulberry and wood smoke, of the sweet earthiness that comes from creatures devoted entirely to their purpose. As your eyes adjust to the lamplit interior, you see your new world clearly. Trays upon trays of silkworms, spinning wheels waiting for your still clumsy hands, and hanging from the rafters, skeins of silk and colors that seem to hold light itself, pale gold like early morning sun, deep indigo like the space between stars, and crimson that makes you think of temple ceremonies and autumn maples. The temple bells finish their morning conversation as you kneel beside your master at the first tray of silkworms. Your knees find the worn spots in the tatami mat where countless other apprentices have knelt before you. And somehow this feels less like learning a trade and more like joining a quiet conspiracy that has been going on for centuries. Yamamoto-san demonstrates the morning ritual with movements so fluid they seem choreographed. He lifts fresh mulberry leaves from a woven basket, examining each one with the attention most people reserve for love letters. "See how this leaf curves," he murmurs, holding it to catch the lamplight. The silkworms prefer the young ones tender enough that they don't waste energy chewing, but mature enough to provide proper nourishment. You watch his hands sort through the leaves with surprising speed, discarding any with brown spots or tears. It's meditative work, this careful selection, and you find your breathing naturally, slowing to match his rhythm. The rejected leaves go into a separate basket. Nothing is wasted here. They'll be composted to feed next year's mulberry trees, because in this world, everything cycles back to everything else with the patience of seasons. "Your turn," he says, and suddenly your hands feel enormous and clumsy as you reach for the leaves. The first few you select earn gentle corrections. Too old feel how tough the stem is. Too young see these pale veins. The silkworms would struggle, but gradually, your fingers begin to learn the subtle differences in texture and color that separate the perfect from the merely adequate. The household begins to stir around you as the sun climbs higher. You hear the soft shuffle of feet on wooden floors, the quiet murmur of morning prayers, and the gentle splash of water as someone begins their ablutions in the courtyard. A woman's voice drifts through the paper screens. Your master's wife, perhaps humming something that sounds like water running over stones. The silkworms themselves are remarkable creatures up close, each one about the size of your thumb and colored like pale jade. They move with deliberate purpose, their tiny heads bobbing as they search for the choicest bits of leaf. Some have already begun spinning their cocoons, wrapping themselves in silk with the dedication of master craftsmen. You wonder if they dream of flying, these earthbound creatures who create something so beautiful they'll adorn them. In China, they call silk the thread that binds heaven to earth. Yamamoto-san tells you as you distribute fresh leaves across the trays. Here in Japan, we understand it differently. Silk doesn't bind, it allows things to flow between worlds while remaining distinct, like water through cloth. The morning light shifts from gray to gold, filtering through the paper screens and casting everything in the warm glow. That makes Heian, Japan, feel like a world painted in watercolors. You can smell rice cooking somewhere nearby, mixed with the green scent of tea being prepared and the faint sweetness of cherry blossoms from the tree just outside the workshop. Your stomach reminds you that time travel apparently doesn't eliminate the need for breakfast, and Yamamoto-san chuckles at the sound. The silkworms eat constantly, he observes. It seems their apprentices do the same, but first, we must finish the morning feeding. They have been waiting patiently while we slept, and patience deserves to be rewarded promptly. The work settles into a gentle rhythm. Select leaves, distribute them evenly, move to the next tray. Your hands grow more confident with each repetition, and you begin to notice things you missed before: how certain silkworms prefer leaves arranged in particular ways, how they communicate with tiny movements that seem almost like sign language, how the sound of their eating changes subtly as the morning progresses. You find yourself wondering what breakfast will be like in this time and place, where even the simplest meal is elevated to an art form. Will there be rice, tea that tastes like morning mist? Your old world seems increasingly distant, separated not just by centuries but by an entirely different understanding of what it means to live deliberately, with attention to small, beautiful things. The morning feeding complete. You settle into the rhythm that defines a silk weaver as day, the patient tending of thousands of small lives. Each one a miracle of transformation happening at the speed of seasons rather than seconds. The silkworms have accepted their breakfast with the dignified enthusiasm of dinner guests who know the chef personally. And now the workshop fills with their gentle, continuous music of eating. Yamamoto-san guides you to observe the different stages of silkworm development spread across the bamboo trays. In the first tray, newly hatched larvae, no bigger than eyelashes, work their way through tender mulberry leaves with the determination of tiny scholars. They will molt 4 times before they're ready to spin, he explains, his voice taking on the patient cadence of someone who has explained this miracle many times, yet still finds wonder in it. You lean closer to watch, fascinated by creatures so small, yet so purposeful. Their movements seem almost choreographed, dozens of tiny heads bobbing in unison as they eat, pausing occasionally as if to appreciate the flavor. The sound they make is like gentle rain on leaves, a soft susurrus that becomes oddly hypnotic as you listen. In the old stories, your master continues, selecting a particularly plump silkworm to show you its tiny face. The goddess Benzaton taught the first silk weavers by watching spiders work in her temple. She noticed that the most beautiful webs came from spiders, who ate slowly and spun with intention, never rushing their art. The middle trays hold adolescent silkworms, now thick as your little finger and pale as moonlight. These have survived their molts and grown sleek with purpose, their appetites enormous. You watch one carefully position a mulberry leaf exactly where it wants it, then methodically eat its way from edge to center with the focus of a master calligrapher approaching a blank scroll. The marvel isn't just their size, but their Some silkworms are bold, climbing over their neighbors to reach the choicest leaves. Others are methodical, staying in one spot and eating everything within reach before moving. A few seem almost contemplative, pausing between bites as if savoring each mouthful or perhaps composing poetry about mulberry flavors. Do they know what they're going to become? You ask, surprised by your own curiosity about these small philosophers. Yamamoto-san considers this seriously. I think they understand purpose without needing to name it. They eat because eating leads to spinning, and spinning leads to transformation. Most humans could learn from their clarity. The far trays hold the largest silkworms, fat and golden and ready for their final act. These have stopped eating and begun their restless search for the perfect spot to begin spinning. You watch one climb deliberately to the corner of its tray, testing the bamboo walls with its tiny feet like an architect surveying a building site. This is where the magic becomes visible. The chosen silkworm begins to move its head in a figure-8 pattern, and from its mouth emerges a thread so fine it's barely visible in the lamplight. Around and around it goes, building the walls of its cocoon with movements so precise they seem automatic, yet so graceful they look like dancing. Each cocoon contains about 1,000 yards of continuous silk thread. Yamamoto-san tells you, his voice soft with reverence. A single thread finer than human hair, stronger than iron wire of the same thickness, and more beautiful than anything we could design ourselves. You find yourself holding your breath as you watch this ancient magic unfold. The silkworm disappears gradually inside its golden cocoon, still spinning, still building its transformation chamber with the patience of someone who understands that the best things cannot be rushed. In your old world, you think this would be called miraculous. Here, it's simply Tuesday morning in the silk workshop. The air grows warmer as the sun climbs higher, carrying new scents through the paper screens, jasmine from the garden, incense from a distant temple, and the green smell of bamboo groves stirring in the morning breeze. Somewhere in the household, you hear the soft scrape of a rice paddle against a wooden bowl, and your stomach responds with enthusiasm that makes even the silkworms look up. Your education in the mysteries of silk quality begins with Yamamoto-san, placing 3 cocoons in your palm, each one golden and perfect to your untrained eye. Close your eyes, he instructs, with the gentle authority of someone who has taught this lesson to dozens of apprentices. In silk work, your fingers must become wiser than your eyes. The first cocoon feels almost weightless, its surface smooth as polished stone. But with a slight give when you press gently. The second has a different texture, slightly rougher, with tiny irregularities you can barely detect. The third feels denser somehow, its shell thicker and more resistant to your cautious pressure. Now listen, he says, tapping each cocoon lightly with a bamboo stick. The sounds are subtle but distinct. The first gives a clean, crisp note like a small bell. The second produces a duller sound, and the third barely resonates at all. You wonder if this is what musicians feel like when they first learn to distinguish between notes that seem identical to everyone else. The first will give us silk fit for the emperor's court robes, Yamamoto-san explains. Perfect density, healthy silkworm, strong continuous thread. The second is good silk, but not great perhaps for a merchant's festival kimono. The third ... He pauses with a slight smile. The third will teach us patience. The silkworm was ill or rushed, and the thread will break often. We will use it for practice pieces. He guides you to a low table by the paper window where morning light filters through in soft rectangles. Here, dozens of cocoons await sorting, and your newly educated fingers begin their work. At first, every cocoon feels the same: smooth, light, mysterious. But gradually, like learning a new language, you begin to detect the subtle differences in weight, texture, and sound that separate exceptional silk from merely adequate. The work is surprisingly meditative. Each cocoon gets examined, tapped, weighed in your palm, then placed in one of several baskets according to quality. Your master works beside you with fluid efficiency, his hands moving in patterns worn smooth by decades of practice. Occasionally, he'll pause to show you something: a cocoon with an unusually perfect shape, another with telltale signs of disease, a rare double cocoon where two silkworms spun together. In the capital, they say that Lady Murasaki can identify the season when silk was spun just by touching it to her cheek. He tells you, selecting a particularly fine specimen. Spring silk has a different character than autumn silk: softer, more willing to take dye. The silkworms eat different leaves as the year progresses, and this changes everything about their thread. The paper screens filter the strengthening sunlight into a warm glow that makes the golden cocoons seem to emit their own light. Outside, you can hear the gentle sounds of the household coming fully awake within. Sandals clicking on stone path, water being drawn from the well, and someone practicing flute scales with the dedication of morning prayers. Your sorting speed improves as your fingers learn their new vocabulary. You develop preferences: cocoons from the corner trays seem consistently finer than those from the center, and you begin to understand why your master arranged them that way. The silkworms that had more space produce better silk, as if beauty requires room to breathe. Why do you think, Yamamoto-san asks as you work them for values silk above gold? You consider this while examining a cocoon that feels particularly promising, because it's beautiful. Beautiful. Yes, but so are many things. Think deeper. The answer comes to you gradually, emerging from the meditative rhythm of sorting. Because it requires transformation. The silkworm gives up everything it was to create something it will never see or use. Your master nods approvingly, and because it cannot be rushed or forced, you cannot threaten a silkworm into producing finer silk, or bribe it with better leaves. It creates beauty according to its nature, in its own time, or not at all. This is why emperors value it. It reminds them that some things exist beyond the reach of power. The pile of sorted cocoons grows as the morning advances, each one representing a small life transformed into potential beauty. You wonder about the silkworms, now sleeping inside their golden chambers, dreaming whatever dreams come before wings. In your old world, you think, most people live their entire lives without witnessing a single transformation this complete, this purposeful, this beautiful. The morning-ass work has built an appetite that announces itself with the subtle rumbling that makes Yamamoto-san glance up from his sorting with knowing amusement. Even the most dedicated apprentice, he observes, cannot live on silk and good intentions alone. Come, let us see what my wife has prepared for the midday meal. You follow him through a covered walkway that connects the workshop to the main house. Your bare feet silent on wooden boards, worn smooth by generations of silk workers. Paper screens slide open to reveal a modest dining area where low tables await, each one set with simple ceramic bowls that somehow manage to look both humble and elegant. Particularly Japanese talent you're beginning to appreciate. Yamamoto-san's wife, Eiki, kneels gracefully beside the tables with the effortless composure of someone who has perfected the art of making guests feel welcome without fuss. She is a woman of middle years with hands that show the telltale stains of indigo dye, and eyes that hold the quiet humor of someone who has spent decades listening to silkworkers discuss thread tension as if it were philosophy. Today we have rice, naturally, she says with a slight smile, pickled vegetables from last autumn's harvest, and miso soup with mushrooms from the mountain behind the temple. Also, young daikon radish that thinks very highly of itself and wishes to be appreciated accordingly. The meal appears with the quiet efficiency of morning mist. No ceremony, just nourishing food, presented with the kind of attention to detail that transforms eating into something approaching meditation. The rice is perfectly prepared, each grain distinct yet cohesive, served in bowls whose simple glaze catches the light like captured water. 3 other workers join you at the low tables, 2 young men about your age who nod politely, and an older woman whose fingers are permanently stained with dye colors that shift from purple to green depending on the light. They eat with the focused appreciation of people whose work demands both physical strength and delicate precision. Conversation flowing as naturally as silk thread from a well-tended cocoon. The court ladies have ordered new robes for the chrysanthemum festival, announces Kenji, one of the younger workers. Between careful bites of pickled cucumber, Lady Seishinagan herself has requested silk, the color of dawn mist over autumn temples, which sounds poetic until you have to actually create it. The older woman, Midori-san, chuckles into her soup. Last year she wanted silk that captured the sound of snow falling on pine boughs. I spent 3 days mixing dyes before I realized she simply meant white with the faintest hint of green. Court ladies speak in poetry even when ordering practical things. Perhaps, suggests Akiko-san, refilling teacups with practiced grace. They understand that the most practical thing is beauty. A robe that makes the wearer feel like poetry might be worth more than one that merely keeps them warm. You savor the miso soup, rich with mushrooms that taste of earth and rain, while listening to conversations that weave together the practical and the sublime with casual ease. In your old world, you think, work and beauty lived in separate rooms. Here, they seem to share the same breath, the same daily rhythm of attention and care. What do you think, Kenji asks you directly, of our slow way of making things? In the capital, they say foreign traders speak of lands where silk is made quickly, with great machines that spin faster than human hands. The question catches you off guard, and you pause with chopsticks halfway to your mouth. How to explain that you've seen those machines, lived in the world they created, without sounding like someone claiming to have visited the moon? I think, you say carefully, that some things are worth doing slowly, because the slowness itself becomes part of the beauty. Like this meal, it would taste different if we ate it standing up, rushing to finish. Yamamoto-san nods approvingly. Wisdom from an apprentice. Perhaps we should all remember that the silkworm could spin its cocoon in minutes if speed were the only goal. Instead, it takes days, and that patience creates silk worthy of him. The conversation turns to temple festivals and seasonal dye recipes and the eternal mystery of Weissern. Mulberry trees produce leaves that make silkworms spin better silk. You find yourself relaxing into the gentle rhythm of shared food and comfortable talk. Your body learning the art of eating deliberately, appreciating each flavor as if it were a small gift rather than mere fuel. The afternoon lesson takes you deeper into the heart of silk making, where transformation becomes tangible in your hands. Yamamoto-san leads you to a corner of the workshop where several clay pots steam gently over small charcoal braziers, each one filled with water heated to precisely the right temperature. hot enough to soften the silk cocoons but not so hot as to damage the delicate threads within. This is where patience becomes visible, he tells you. Selecting a handful of the finest cocoons from your morning's sorting. Each cocoon is a puzzle that must be solved gently, or the thread will break and months of work become mere scraps. He demonstrates by dropping a single golden cocoon into the steaming water, where it bobs like a tiny boat on a warm sea. Almost immediately, you can see the outer layers beginning to soften, and with a pair of bamboo tweezers so delicate they seem made for handling butterfly wings, he begins probing for the threads beginning. The silkworm starts spinning from the outside, he explains, his movements so subtle you have to lean close to see them. But the thread we want, the long, continuous strand, begins. Several layers in, we must be detectives, following clues until we find the true beginning. Finding that first thread requires a touch so light it's barely contact at all. Like trying to catch morning mist with your fingertips. You watch as Yamamoto-san's tweezers probe the softened cocoon surface, testing, searching, until suddenly he lifts sand. With it comes a thread so fine it's almost invisible in the steamy air. Now comes the magic, he says, and guides the thread to a wooden reel that turns with the slow, steady rhythm of a prayer wheel. As the reel turns, the thread unwinds from the cocoon in one continuous strand, emerging from the steaming water like a golden miracle that seems to create itself. Your first attempt produces mostly frustration and broken threads. The water temperature feels perfect to your hand, but apparently not to the cocoon, which stubbornly refuses to reveal its secrets. Your tweezers feel clumsy as wooden spoons, and when you finally do locate what might be the beginning of a thread, it snaps at the first gentle tug. The cocoon is teaching you, Yamamoto-san observes mildly. It's saying that your definition of gentle and its definition are not yet in agreement. Try again, but this time, touch it as if it were made of morning dew. The second attempt goes better. You find yourself breathing more slowly, moving more deliberately, approaching the cocoon as if it were a sleeping bird that might startle at any sudden motion. When the thread finally begins to unwind, smooth and golden and impossibly fine, you feel a quiet triumph that has nothing to do with conquest and everything to do with cooperation. The thread keeps coming yard after yard of silk, so fine you can barely see it except where it catches the light from the paper windows. One cocoon, you realize with growing amazement, contains enough thread to stretch from the workshop to the distant temple and back again. A single silkworm spending its entire transformed existence in darkness creates something that could wrap around your entire former life several times over. Each thread is continuous, Yamamoto-san tells you as you watch your first successful reeling. No knots, no joins, no places where one piece ends and another begins. From start to finish, it is one unbroken line of intention made manifest. The work settles into a rhythm that feels almost ceremonial, selecting cocoons, testing the water temperature, finding the thread beginning, guiding it onto the reel. Your hands grow more confident with each repetition, and you begin to develop preferences. Cocoons from corner positions reel more smoothly. Morning cocoons seem to give finer thread than afternoon ones, and some cocoons practically volunteer their secrets while others remain stubbornly mysterious. The afternoon light shifts through the paper screens, casting everything in amber tones that make the emerging silk threads look like captured sunbeams. Outside, you can hear the gentle sounds of daily life, continuing water being drawn from wells, children playing games with wooden hoops, and somewhere distant, someone practicing the same haunting flute melody you heard this morning. You wonder what your old world would make of this patience, this willingness to spend an entire afternoon coaxing secrets from cocoons one thread at a time. Here, slowness isn't the enemy of productivity, it is productivity, measured not in quantity but in the quality of attention brought to each small, perfect task. The afternoon sun has begun its gentle descent toward the Western mountains, when Yamamoto-san sets down his reeling tools and reaches for a woven basket by the workshop door. "Come," he says, adjusting his outer robe with the practiced movements of someone preparing for public appearance. "Today you will see how silk travels from our quiet workshop into the great world beyond." The walk to Kyoto as central market takes you through narrow streets that wind between wooden houses like streams between stones. Each turn reveals new wonders: a blacksmith's forge where sparks dance like fireflies, a potter's wheel spinning clay into bowls with hypnotic precision, and gardens so carefully tended they look like three-dimensional paintings of what gardens should aspire to become. Your master carries samples of the workshop's finest silk in a lacquered box, each skein wrapped in paper and labeled with characters you're beginning to recognize. The silk moves like liquid light even through its protective wrapping, and you find yourself walking more carefully, as if carrying something that might dissolve at the first rough handling. The market reveals itself gradually, first as a murmur of distant voices, then as the mingled scents of spices and incense and human commerce, and finally as a maze of temporary stalls and permanent shops where every conceivable craft finds its way into the world. Silk merchants occupy the most prestigious section, their goods displayed on low tables covered with pristine white cloth that makes every color seem more vivid. Calls a merchant whose elaborate robes suggest either great success or impressive optimism. "Have you brought me silk to make the court ladies weep with envy?" Your master approaches with the measured dignity that seems to be his natural state, bowing precisely the amount appropriate for their respective social positions, a complex calculation you're still learning to navigate. "Tukashi-sen, I have brought silk that understands its own beauty without needing to prove it." The negotiation that follows is unlike any commerce you've witnessed. Instead of hurried haggling, it unfolds like a dance performed by masters who know each other's steps by heart. Takeshi-san examines each skein with the attention most people reserve for love letters, holding it to the light, testing its weight, even listening as he runs it between his fingers. "This indigo," he murmurs, lifting a skein the color of deep twilight, speaks of rain on temple roofs, and this ... He holds up, silk dyed the pale yellow of early morning. This captures the exact moment when night agrees to become day. While the adults conduct their poetry of commerce, you watch the market swirl around you with the constant motion of a river in flood. Farmers bring vegetables arranged in baskets, like offerings to invisible gods. Spice sellers display their goods in precise geometric patterns that turn purchasing into a form of worship. And threading through it all, you catch glimpses of court nobles in their robes so elaborate they seem to be wearing portable gardens. A procession approaches, not imperial, but significant enough to part the crowd like water around a stone. For men in matching robes carry a palanquin, whose occupant remains hidden behind silk screens, painted with autumn scenes. But as they pass, a breeze lifts one corner of the screen, and you glimpse a woman whose layered robes create a symphony of color so complex it makes your eyes water just trying to follow all the subtle gradations from pale rose to deep burgundy. Lady Akemi, Takeshi-san whispers reverently. They say she owns 40 different shades of purple alone, and can identify the season when any silk was woven just by touch. Her robes for the Cherry Blossom Festival required silk from 3 different provinces. The procession passed, leaving behind the faint scent of sandalwood and the memory of colors that seemed to shift and flow like water made visible. You understand now why your morning work of sorting cocoons mattered. Somewhere in that traveling rainbow might be threads you helped select, transformed from silkworm dreams into wearable poetry. The transaction concludes with mutual satisfaction and the kind of bowing that suggests both parties feel they've gone the better deal. Your master's lacquered box is notably lighter, and his manner suggests the quiet pleasure of someone whose craft has found worthy appreciation. You see, he tells you as you walk home through lengthening shadows, silk is never sold, only matched with its proper destiny. Our work is to create something so beautiful it finds its own way to where it belongs. Evening brings a different rhythm to the workshop, one measured not by the urgent activities of daylight, but by the patient ceremonies of transformation. Yamamoto-san lights oil lamps with the careful attention of someone conducting a small ritual. Each flame adding its warm glow to the gathering dusk until the workshop becomes a golden cave where ancient mysteries unfold. Tonight you will learn the art of dyeing, the alchemy that transforms plain silk into colors that have no names in your old world. The preparation began hours ago, when Midori-san started her fires and began the slow process of waking sleeping pigments from their mineral dreams. Now the workshop air carries scents that seem borrowed from distant gardens. The green sharpness of indigo, the earthy sweetness of safflower, and something else complex and floral that you can't quite identify. Yamamoto-san explains. As he guides you to where several clay pots simmer over carefully tended charcoal braziers, is not applied to silk. It is invited to live there. The difference determines whether you create beauty or merely stain fabric. The indigo pot holds particular fascination, a dark brew that looks almost black until Midori-san stirs it with a wooden paddle. And suddenly the surface blooms with copper and purple iridescence like oil on water. Indigo is alive, she tells you, her hands permanently stained blue-black from years of coaxing this particular magic. It breathes. It sleeps. It has moods. Today, it feels cooperative, but tomorrow, ... Double quotes. She shrugs expressively. Your first lesson involves preparing silk for dyeing, a process more complex than simply dunking thread into colored water. The silk must be cleaned in solutions that smell faintly of ash and mountain streams, then mordanted with substances that sound like ingredients for ancient spells, ion dissolved in vinegar. Alum powder that glitters like crushed stars and extracted from oak galls by processes handed down through generations of dye masters. Why make it so complicated? You ask, watching Midori-san measure out powders with the precision of a temple pharmacist. Because, she replies, stirring a solution that shifts from green to brown as you watch. Anything worth doing well requires understanding the nature of what you're working with. Silk is prouded, will accept color only from someone who approaches it with proper respect and knowledge. The safflower dye requires different preparation entirely. What look like ordinary dried petals transforms through patient extraction into colors ranging from pale yellow to deep crimson, depending on which alkaline solutions are used and in what sequence. You watch Midori-san work with bundles of the dried flowers, coaxing out first the yellow dyes, then gradually progressing to the precious reds that will eventually grace court robes. Safflower red was worth more than gold in my grandmother's time, she tells you while filtering the precious liquid through silk screens. So fine they seem made of moonbeams. A single court robe dyed true safflower red could cost more than a house. But look at this colorese. There anything in nature more beautiful than this particular red? She holds up a small sample of freshly dyed silk, and you have to admit there isn't. The color seems to glow from within, as if the fabric had captured sunset and was slowly releasing it back to the world. It's red. But read the way poetry is words technically accurate but somehow completely insufficient to describe what you are actually experiencing. Your first attempt at dyeing involves a small skein of practiced silk and a pot of mat root that should produce a reliable red-brown color. Simple enough, you think, until you discover that simple in silk dyeing means managing water temperature, timing, pH levels, and the mystical relationship between thread and pigment. Apparently requires the kind of intuition usually reserved for reading other people's thoughts. The silk goes into the dye bath pail and emerges. Well, not quite the warm red-brown demonstrated in Midori-san's sample. Your result looks more like the color of old blood mixed with disappointment, which makes Yamamoto-san chuckle in a way that suggests this is exactly what he expected. The silk is teaching you humility, he observes mildly. It's saying that good intentions are not sufficient. Two must also bring knowledge, patience, and respect for processes that existed long before you arrived and will continue long after you leave. But even your imperfect attempt has moments of magic. As the silk emerges from the dye bath, dripping and transformed, you watch colors shift and settle like living things, finding their proper homes. What seemed like failure in the pot becomes something more complex on the thread knot. Beautiful. Exactly, but honest in a way that makes you want to try again. The temple bells that marked your first morning in this silk-woven world now call across the evening air with deeper, more resonant voices, as if the bronze itself has grown richer throughout the day. Yamamoto-san sets aside his dye-stained apron and reaches for a clean outer robe, his movements taking on the deliberate grace of someone preparing for sacred rather than secular activities. "Come," he says, adjusting his sleeves with practiced precision. "Tonight we join the evening prayers at Kuf. Your hands have worked with silk all day now. Let your spirit work with something equally fine but invisible." The walk to the temple takes you through streets, transformed by twilight, into something that feels more like moving through a living scroll painting than navigating an actual city. Paper lanterns begin to glow in workshop windows, casting warm rectangles of light onto pathways where the day's activities settle into gentler rhythms. Somewhere in the distance, a shamisen plays a melody that seems designed to accompany the exact speed at which shadows lengthen. The temple grounds reveal themselves gradually as you climb stone steps worn smooth by centuries of evening visitors. Ancient cryptomeria trees tower overhead like green-black pillars supporting the sky, their branches whispering secrets in languages older than human speech. The air grows thick with incense, sandalwood, and pine, and something else that smells like prayers made tangible. Other worshippers move along the paths with the unhurried purpose of people who understand that approaching the sacred requires a different kind of time than approaching the practical. A woman in layered robes that whisper with each step carries offerings of rice and sake. An elderly man moves so slowly he seems to be practicing a walking meditation, each footfall a small ceremony of presence. The main hall emerges from the gathering darkness like something conjured from collective longing. Massive wooden beams, supporting a roof that curves upward at the edges as if preparing for flight. Paper screens glowing with interior lamplight and bronze bells hang in the evening air like frozen music waiting for someone to wake it. Inside, the ceremony unfolds with a kind of precision that comes from generations of practice. Monks in saffron robes move through familiar sequences lighting incense, arranging offerings, beginning the evening chants that seem to emerge not from individual voices but from the building itself. The Buddha statue presides over everything with an expression of such perfect compassion that looking at it makes your chest feel both empty and full simultaneously. You kneel on tatami mats beside Yamamoto-san, your body automatically adjusting to postures it seems to remember from some previous existence. The chanting begins deep, rhythmic syllables that feel less like words and more like the universe clearing its throat. Around you, other worshippers join in with voices, weathered by decades of evening prayers, creating harmonies that seem to rise from the earth itself. The chants speak of impermanence, of the constant flow between form and emptiness, of the way all things arise and pass away like silk threads woven into patterns too large for any single person to perceive. You find yourself thinking of the silkworms who gave their transformed lives to create beauty they would never see, of dyes extracted from flowers that bloomed and faded in distant seasons, of the patient hands that guided raw materials through metamorphoses that border on the miraculous. Everything changes, the voices seem to say. The silkworm becomes silk, but the essence of transformation continues. The dye fades, but the knowledge of color persists. The weaver ages, but the pattern endures. The incense creates shapes in the lamplight that look almost like silk threads being spun by invisible hands, rising and dispersing and reforming in patterns that suggest meaning just beyond comprehension. You breathe it in and feel something in your chest, relax not physically, but deeper than that. As if some tension you didn't know you were carrying finally agrees to dissolve. As the formal prayers conclude, you notice that the evening hasn't ended so much as transformed into something quieter and more spacious. Worshippers linger in small groups, speaking in voices barely above whispers, as if reluctant to break the spell of peace that seems to emanate from the very stones of the temple floor. Walking home through streets now fully claimed by night, you carry with you the sense of having touched something vast and patient, the same quality you've been learning to recognize in silkwork, where beauty emerges not from forcing or rushing, but from understanding natural processes and learning to work in harmony with them rather than against them. Night settles over the workshop like a gentle hand, bringing with it the kind of profound quiet that makes every small sound. The whisper of silk against bamboo, the soft hiss of oil flames, the distant murmur of evening conversation seem magnified and somehow sacred. This is when the most delicate work happens, when tired eyes learn to see by touch and patient hands discover rhythms invisible in daylight's urgency. Yamamoto-san lights additional oil lamps, arranging them around a low loom that seems to have been waiting all day for this moment. The wooden frame gleams in the flickering light, its every surface polished smooth by generations of weavers who understood that tools become extensions of the hands that use them, and hands become extensions of intentions too subtle for words. Now, he says, settling cross-legged before the loom with the fluid grace of water finding its level, you will learn why we call this craft painting with light. All our work until now, the feeding, the sorting, the reeling, the dyeing has been preparation for this moment when individual threads become something greater than themselves. The loom holds threads already prepared and tensioned to the warp that will provide structure for whatever pattern emerges. These vertical threads catch the lamplight like harp strings made visible, each one precisely spaced and aligned with the kind of perfection that suggests hours of patient adjustment. Your fingers test their tension gently, marveling at how something so fine can feel so strong. Feel how they sing, Yamamoto-san instructs, running his hand lightly across the warp threads. They do sing a faint, high note that seems to come from the silk itself rather than the air around it. Good tension, sounds like morning wind through bamboo. Too tight, and they snap. Too loose, and the pattern becomes uncertain. Your first attempts at weaving involve learning to pass the shatala wooden boat that carries the weft thread through the shed created by raising alternate warp threads. Simple in theory, but your hands approach the task with all the grace of someone trying to thread a needle while wearing mittens. The shuttle catches, tangles, refuses to glide smoothly through spaces that look plenty wide enough to accommodate it. The shuttle knows when you're trying too hard, observes your master with gentle humor. Silk responds to confidence, but confidence earned through understanding, not imposed through force. Try again, but this time, move as if you've been doing this for years. Gradually, muscle memory that shouldn't exist begins to emerge. Your hands find rhythms they seem to remember from some previous life where weaving was as natural as breathing. The shuttle starts to glide more smoothly, carrying thread through the warp with movements that feel less like technique and more like conversation between materials that understand each other perfectly. The pattern you're relearning is deceptively simpler, basic plain weave that forms the foundation for more complex designs. But even this elementary structure reveals silk's remarkable nature. As warp and weft interlock, they create something stronger than either thread alone, while somehow remaining distinct enough that light catches each intersection differently, creating subtle variations in color and texture that shift with every small change in viewing angle. This is why emperors prize silk above gold, Yamamoto-san tells you as you work. Gold is beautiful, but static it looks the same in morning light and evening shadows. Silk lives, changes, responds to light and movement and the intentions of whoever wears it. A court robe made from our silk will look different at dawn than at sunset, different when the wearer is happy than when she's sad. The work settles into meditative rhythm lift. The heddle, pass the shuttle, beat the weft gently into place, change the shed, repeat. Your breathing slows to match the pace, and you begin to understand why weaving happens best at night. In darkness, there are fewer distractions from the subtle communications between hands and materials. Fewer temptations to rush toward visible results, rather than trusting in processes that unfold at their own proper speed. Hours pass unmeasured, except by the growing length of fabric on the loom, and the gradual deepening of night sounds. Outside temple bells marking late prayers, the distant calls of night watchmen, and underneath it all, the patient whisper of silk threads, learning to become something more beautiful than any individual thread could imagine. Dawn arrives not with the dramatic announcement of sunrise, but with the gradual acknowledgement that darkness has been negotiating its retreat for some time. You wake on a sleeping mat that somehow feels more comfortable than beds you remember from your old world. Perhaps because every muscle in your body has learned new ways of holding itself the particular tensions that come from work that engages both precision and patience. The workshop already hums with quiet activity when you slide open the paper screen that separates sleeping quarters from working space. The silkworms, indifferent to human schedules, have been eating steadily through the night, and their gentle rustling provides a constant background music that makes the morning feel less like waking and more like joining a conversation already in progress. Yamamoto-san kneels beside the newest batch of cocoons, and you see immediately that something significant has happened during the night hours. Several more silkworms have completed their spinning and now rest inside perfect golden chambers, while others have begun the mysterious process of transformation that will change them from earthbound creatures into beings capable of flight, though they allow never live to use their wings. The autumn silk, he explains, holding up a cocoon that seems to glow with interior light, has qualities we never find in spring or summer silk. The silkworms eat leaves touched by frost, and this changes everything: the strength of the thread, the way it takes dye, even how it feels against human skin. The morning feeding takes on new significance, now that you understand each mulberry leaf as contributing to a quality of silk that will eventually find its way into robes worn by people whose names might echo through centuries. Your hands move more confidently as you distribute the carefully selected leaves, and you find yourself paying attention to details that escaped you during your first overwhelming day. Some silkworms show clear preferences for leaves from particular parts of the tree, the tender new growth versus the mature leaves, those that caught morning dew versus those that remained dry. These preferences, you're beginning to understand, are arbitrary but reflect subtle differences in nutrition that will eventually express themselves in the quality of silk they produce. In China, Yamamoto-san tells you while examining a particularly promising group of late-stage silk, they say that silk carries the character of the season when it was made. Spring silk is hopeful and flexible. Summer silk is strong and confident. But autumn silk... He pauses, testing the weight of a nearly completed cocoon. Autumn silk understands both beauty and it knows that the most precious things are also the most fleeting. The reeling work goes more smoothly today, your hands having learned overnight the precise combination of patience and persistence required to coax continuous threads from their golden prisons. You develop a rhythm that feels almost ceremonial. Test the water temperature. Select the cocoon, find the thread beginning, guide it onto the reel with movements so gentle they barely qualify as action. But today brings a new challenge: learning to identify and separate the different grades of silk as they emerge. The outer threads, coarser and less lustrous, will be used for everyday fabrics. The middle sections provide the silk suitable for merchants, clothes, and temple decorations. But the inner threads fine as spider webs and strong as steel cables, these will become part of robes fit for imperial ceremonies. Feel the difference, Yamamoto-san instructs, guiding your fingers to touch threads from different parts of the same cocoon. The variations are subtle but unmistakable once you know to look for them: differences in thickness, and the way light reflects from the surface, and the almost musical quality of the sound they make when plucked gently. Your growing pile of reeled silk represents hours of patient work. But more than that, it represents your hands learning to collaborate with natural processes that began long before you arrived and will continue long after you leave. Each thread connects you backward to the silkworm that spun it and forward to the person who will eventually wear fabric made from your morning's work. The sun climbs higher, filtering through paper screens to cast everything in the warm, golden light that makes even the most ordinary moments feel touched by magic. Somewhere in the distance, temple bells mark the progression of morning prayers, and you realize that you've begun to measure time, not by hours, but by the completion of small, perfect tasks that connect you to rhythms older and more reliable than any clock your old world ever invented. The afternoon brings an honor you had anticipated. Midori-san approaches with brushes, so delicate they seem spun from captured moonbeams and pigments that shimmer in their tiny ceramic dishes like jewels dissolved in liquid light. Today, she announces with the quiet ceremony of someone about to share sacred knowledge, you learn to paint dreams onto silk. The brushes are works of art themselves, each one crafted from materials that sound like ingredients for ancient spellskit whiskers, for the finest detail work, badger hair for broader strokes, and one special brush made from the tip of a crane's feather that Midori-san handles with the reverence most people reserve for religious relics. The handles are bamboo polished to silk-like smoothness, balanced so perfectly they seem weightless in your palm. Painting on silk, she explains while preparing a workspace that looks more like a shrine than a craft station, requires understanding that the fabric is alive and has opinions about what colors it will accept and how patterns should flow. You cannot force designs onto silk, you must invite them to emerge through collaboration between your intention and the silkiest nature. The pigments come from sources that connect your work to distant mountains and ancient trade routes. Lapis lazuli, ground to powder, creates blues that seem to hold pieces of sky. Cinnabar produces reds that pulse with interior fire. Gold leaf, applied in techniques passed down through generations of master painters, adds accents that catch light like trap stars. Each color has its own personality, its own requirements for application and blending. Your first lesson involves learning to load the brush properly, not with the casual dipping you remember from your old world, but with careful attention to how much pigment the silk will accept at any given moment. Too much, and the color bleeds beyond intended boundaries. Too little, and the image appears weak and uncertain. The balance requires intuition that develops only through practice and countless small failures. Start with bamboo, Midori-san instructs, showing you how to hold the brush so that each stroke carries the natural rhythm of growing things. Bamboo teaches you about strength within flexibility, about how curves can be more powerful than straight lines, about the beauty that emerges when you stop trying to control every detail. Your first attempts produce bamboo that looks more like confused grass than the elegant, swaying forms in Midori-san's demonstration. But gradually, as your breathing slows and your grip relaxes, something begins to change. The brush starts to move less like a tool being wielded, and more like an extension of your own intention, guided by the silk's subtle feedback about where colors want to flow. Feel how the silk drinks the pigment, she says, watching your brush. Create strokes that are beginning to look like they belong on the fabric, rather than merely sitting on top of it. Good silk painting happens when you paint with the silk, rather than on it. The threads become partners in creating the image. The afternoon progresses through lessons in the imperial flower that requires understanding both botanical accuracy and symbolic meaning. Each petal must suggest the flower's essential nature, while fitting into compositional patterns that speak to deeper truths about impermanence and beauty. The challenge isn't just technical, but philosophical. How do you capture something alive and changing in a medium that will preserve this moment for decades or centuries? Hours pass in the concentrated silence that comes when mind and hands work together on tasks requiring complete presence. Your painted silk grows more confident as you learn to trust the collaboration between brush, pigment, and fabric. The chrysanthemums begin to look less like representations of flowers and more like flowers dreaming of becoming art. In the court, Medora-san tells you while mixing a particular shade of purple that seems to shift between colors depending on the angle of view. They say that Lady Murasaki once spent 3 months perfecting a single painted silk sleeve. Not because she was slow, but because she understood that some kinds of beauty require time to mature, like wine or friendship or wisdom. As evening light begins to slant through the paper screens, casting your work in golden tones that make the painted silk seem to glow from within, you understand why silk painting is considered one of the highest arts. It combines technical mastery with aesthetic sensitivity, patience with spontaneity, individual expression with respect for traditions that connect you to centuries of artists who discovered that true beauty emerges not from domination, but from harmony between human intention and natural processes. Morning arrives with unusual energy crackling through the workshop today, brings news that transforms routine silk work into preparation for something approaching the sacred. A messenger from the imperial court, resplendent in robes that make your finest practice pieces look like rough hemp, kneels formally before Yamamoto-san with a commission that makes everyone in the workshop stop breathing for a moment. His Imperial Majesty, the messenger announces with the kind of precision that suggests these words have been rehearsed until they achieve the weight of ritual. Requests silk for the New Year ceremonies. 12 bolts of your finest autumn weaving, dyed in colors that capture the transition from one season to the next. Painted with motifs that speak to the eternal cycle of renewal. The silence that follows feels charged with the same energy that precedes lightning. You watch Yamamoto-san's face undergo subtle transformations as he processes not just the honor, but the responsibility of creating silk that will be worn by the Son of Heaven himself during ceremonies that connect earthly governance to cosmic order. We are deeply honored, he responds with bows so precise they seem choreographed, and will dedicate our complete attention to creating silk worthy of His Imperial Majesty's gracious commission. After the messenger departs in a rustle of expensive fabric and carefully modulated dignity, the workshop erupts into the kind of controlled excitement that comes when craftsmen realize they are about to attempt something that will either represent the pinnacle of their careers or teach them humility in ways they rather not experience. 12 bolts, Yamamoto-san repeats, as if testing the words for hidden meanings. Each one perfect, each one unique, all of them harmonizing to create a complete statement about the nature of imperial power and seasonal change. He looks around the workshop at silk in various stages of completion, calculating not just materials and time, but the kind of sustained perfection that allows no margin for error. The next hours transform ordinary silk work into something approaching military precision. Every cocoon gets re-examined and resorted according to standards, so exacting they make your previous day's careful work look casual. Only the finest threads will be acceptable silk, so perfect it seems to emit its own light, dyed with colors so pure they might have been extracted from the essential idea of color rather than mere pigments. Your role in this imperial commission becomes clear as meat approaches with silk already woven into fabric of such quality. It makes you afraid to touch it. Today you learn painting fit for emperors, she says, laying out brushes that look like they were crafted by master toolmakers rather than ordinary artisans. Every stroke must be perfect, because imperfection in imperial silk becomes imperfection in the cosmic order itself. The motifs for the Imperial Commission require understanding symbolic languages that connect visual patterns to philosophical concepts. Cherry blossoms represent the beauty of pine branches suggest endurance through all seasons. Dragons embody the Emperor's connection to celestial forces, but must be painted with precise attention to the number of claws. The angle of the head, the flow of the main details that differentiate imperial dragons from lesser celestial beings. Watch my brush. Midori Scent instructs as she begins a dragon that seems to emerge from the silk rather than being applied to it. Imperial painting requires understanding that you read, not just decorating fabric, you recreating visual prayers that will be worn by someone whose clothing must reflect the harmony between heaven and earth. The dragon takes shape with movements so fluid they seem like calligraphy written in pigment rather than ink. Each scale is individually painted but flows seamlessly into the overall pattern. The eyes, added last with a brush, so fine it contains only 3 cat whiskers, seem to look directly at you with an intelligence that makes you step back involuntarily. Hours pass in work so concentrated it feels like meditation. Your own contributions to the Imperial Commission painted bamboo leaves that will border the main dragon motifs require perfection you didn't know you possessed. Each leaf must be botanically accurate, aesthetically pleasing, and symbolically appropriate, while fitting into compositional patterns that will be viewed by people whose understanding of beauty has been refined through generations of exposure to the finest art. As evening approaches, you realize that working on imperial silk has changed something fundamental about your relationship to the craft. Every previous day was practice for this moment when your hands would create something that connects directly to the spiritual and political center of the world you've learned to call home. The harvest moon rises like a golden lantern suspended between earth and heaven, casting the workshop in light so pure it seems borrowed from some more perfect world where shadows, their place and beauty requires no explanation. Tonight marks the festival of the autumn moon, when the entire capital pauses to acknowledge the season's gift of abundance and the approaching promise of winter's contemplative rest. You've been invited to join the household's celebration, honor that feels both natural and miraculous. As if the past days of learning silk craft have woven you into the social fabric, as surely as warp threads create the foundation for complex patterns. The festival clothes laid out for your use represent the finest work of the season. Silk you helped reel, dyed with colors you assisted in creating, woven on the loom where you learned that patience and precision can transform individual threads into something approaching magic. Dressing for the festival becomes a ceremony in itself. Each layer of silk serves both practical and aesthetic purposes. The inner robe provides comfort and warmth, while outer layers create visual harmonies that change with every movement. The colors shift from pale gold near your skin to deep indigo at the surface, with painted motifs that seem to move in the moonlight like living things temporarily agreeing to remain still. The household garden has been transformed into something that exists at the intersection of careful planning and natural beauty. Paper lanterns hang from maple branches, already beginning their autumn transformation, creating pools of warm light that make every leaf seem precious. Low tables arranged on tatami mats offer delicacies that look more like small sculptures than mere food, each dish positioned to create visual poems about seasonal abundance. Other guests arrive in silk that catches the lantern light and reflects it back. Transform merchants whose success allows them to wear colors once reserved for nobility. Temple officials whose robes suggest both worldly sophistication and spiritual detachment. And craftsmen from neighboring workshops whose presence creates an informal guild of people who understand that true luxury lies not in ostentation but in quality so subtle it reveals itself only to educated appreciation. The formal moon viewing begins as the golden disk clears the rooftops and bathes the garden in light that seems designed specifically for contemplating beauty. Traditional poems are recited verses about seasonal change, the relationship between human emotions and natural cycles, and the way moonlight transforms familiar landscapes into realms where ordinary rules of time and space become negotiable. In this light observes an elderly woman whose silk gleams with threads of actual silver. We see clearly that the moon is not separate from us, but part of the same fabric that includes mountains and temples and the silk we wear. Everything connected, everything reflecting, everything else. The steak served tonight tastes different from ordinary rice one. More complex, with flavors that seem to capture the essence of autumn itself. It's drunk from cups so delicate they seem made from crystallized moonlight. And each sip becomes a small ceremony of appreciation for the season's gifts and the human skill that transforms raw materials into experiences worthy of festivals. Music drifts through the garden, a shamisen played by someone whose understanding of melody goes beyond technique into the realm where sound becomes a form of silk spinning, creating patterns in air that complement the visual beauty surrounding you. The notes seem to emerge not from the instrument but from the moonlight itself, as if the night has found its voice and chosen to sing about the connections between all beautiful things. You find yourself thinking about the silkworms whose transformed lives created the fabric you're wearing, about dyes extracted from flowers that bloomed in distant fields, about hands that guided threads through processes so complex they border on alchemy. The festival celebration becomes a way of honoring not just seasonal abundance, but the human capacity to transform raw materials into experiences that feed something deeper than physical hunger. As the evening progresses and conversation flows like silk threads being woven into ever more complex patterns, you realize that this festival represents something you've been learning throughout your time in the workshop. That true wealth lies not in accumulating things, but in developing the sensitivity to appreciate beauty wherever it appears and the skill to participate in its creation rather than merely consuming what others have made. The moon reaches its zenith, casting everything in silver light that makes the garden seem like a scene painted on silk by artists who understood that the most profound beauty often appears when we pause our ordinary activities long enough to notice what has been present all along, waiting patiently for eyes educated enough to see it clearly. The final morning arrives not with the urgency of endings, but with the gentle recognition that some experiences complete themselves naturally, like silk threads reaching the end of their cocoons, or seasons transitioning into their successors without fanfare or resistance. You wake to find the workshop bathed in the particular quality of autumn light that seems to understand its own temporary nature and chooses to be especially beautiful because of it. Your hands move through the morning tasks with a confidence. Surprises you feeding silkworms with the precise attention they deserve, sorting cocoons by qualities you can now detect through touch alone, reeling silk threads that emerge from their golden prisons like continuous lines of captured sunlight. The work has become as natural as breathing, each movement flowing into the next with the kind of unconscious grace that comes when body and mind agree completely about what needs to be done. Yamamoto-san watches your work with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose teaching has found fertile ground. You understand now, he says, examining a skein of silk you've just finished reeling, that we are not silk makers, but silk servants. We provide conditions that allow transformation to occur naturally, then step back and let the miracle complete itself. The Imperial Commission nears completion, 12 bolts of silk that represent the combined best efforts of everyone in the workshop. Your own contributions, painted bamboo borders that required weeks to perfect, have been incorporated into designs of such complexity and beauty that looking at them directly feels almost presumptuous, like accidentally overhearing a conversation between gods about the proper way to organize paradise. This silk, Midori-san tells you, while making final adjustments to a dragon whose painted scales seem to shift in the morning light, will outlast all of us long after we've returned to the elements. Emperors not yet born will wear robes made from threads we guided into existence. In this way, our hands become immortal. The thought creates a strange sensation in your chest, part melancholy, part wonder. In your old world, most work disappeared almost as quickly as it was completed, consumed and forgotten without trace. Here, patience and skill create objects that carry forward not just their makers' intentions, but their connection to natural processes that have been unfolding since the world began. The workshop has become a place where you belong completely, where every tool fits your hand perfectly, and every task unfolds with the satisfying inevitability of solutions to problems you've learned to understand from the inside. You know the sound of healthy silkworms eating, the feel of thread tension that will produce perfect weaving, the precise moment when dye baths are ready to accept silk and transform it without violence. Yet beneath this deep comfort runs an awareness that your time here approaches its natural completion, not because you're being dismissed, but because the teaching cycle has reached fulfillment, and new students will soon arrive to begin their own journeys from confusion through competence toward the kind of mastery that serves beauty rather than ego. In silk work, Yamamoto-san explains as you sit together in the afternoon light, we learned that the most important skill is knowing when to let go. Silkworms must release their grip on caterpillar existence to become capable of flight. Cocoons must be unwound to become thread. Thread must surrender its individual identity to become fabric. And weavers, he pauses, looking around the workshop that has been your world for these transformative days. Weavers must learn that mastery includes understanding when the teaching is complete. The day settles toward evening with the gradual pace that has taught you to measure time by the completion of meaningful work, rather than the arbitrary divisions of clocks. As shadows lengthen and the first oil lamps begin to glow in paper windows throughout the district, you realize that this world of silken seasons has woven itself into your understanding so thoroughly that leaving it feels less like departure than like carrying it forward into whatever world awaits. Your hands rest now on silk you've helped create threads that connect you backward to silkworms and mulberry trees and ancient knowledge, forward to people who will wear beauty you've helped bring into existence. The workshop grows quiet around you, filled with the patient presence of materials waiting to be transformed and tools ready for tomorrow's work. While outside, temple bells mark the day as transition toward the contemplative peace that comes when work, worthy of full attention, finds its natural completion. The evening settles around you like the finest silk, soft and enveloping, carrying the day's accumulated peace in its gentle folds. You find yourself standing in the workshop doorway, watching shadows gather among the bamboo trays where silkworms continue their patient work. Indifferent to human schedules and the approaching night, their gentle rustling creates a lullaby that seems designed to ease the transition between the focused attention of daylight hours and the restorative darkness that allows both bodies and spirits to process the day's lessons. The lamp flames flicker lower now, their golden light growing softer and more diffuse, transforming the workshop into a space that exists somewhere between waking and sleeping. Between the practical world of silk production and the dreamlike realm where all beautiful things originate, you can feel your breathing naturally, slowing your heartbeat, settling into rhythms that match the timeless patience you've learned from watching cocoons transform into thread, thread into fabric, fabric into garments that will outlast the hands that created them. Outside, the night sounds of this ancient world create their own gentle symphony, distant temple bells marking the hour for evening prayers, the soft whisper of wind through bamboo groves, the faint murmur of household activities settling toward rest. Somewhere in the capital, court ladies are perhaps choosing which silk robes to wear for tomorrow's ceremonies, their decisions connecting them to workshops like this one where patient hands have transformed the dreams of silkworms into wearable poetry. Your own hands rest quietly now, but they carry within them the memory of every task. You've learned the gentle pressure needed to feed silkworms without disturbing their concentration, the precise touch required to find thread beginnings in soft cocoons, The flowing movements that guide shuttles through loom warps, like boats navigating streams of light. These skills have become part of your body's wisdom, knowledge that will remain long after the specific details of individual days fade into the general sweetness of time well spent. The silk you've helped create lies folded in the workshop's storage chests, each piece representing hours of attention so complete it felt less like work and more like meditation. In the morning, some of this silk will begin its journey toward distant destinations, merchant houses, temple ceremonies, where beauty serves purposes larger than mere decoration. But tonight, it rests in darkness that allows its colors to dream of the light that will eventually call them back into visibility. You close your eyes and let the workshop's familiar sounds wash over you, the whisper of silk against bamboo, the soft hiss of oil flames, the gentle breathing of a household settling toward sleep. In this quiet space between day and night, between one breath and the next, you can feel yourself becoming part of the larger rhythm that includes silkworms and seasons, moonlight and morning mist, the patient hands of craftsmen, and the eternal cycle of transformation that turns simple materials into objects worthy of reverence. Sleep approaches now with the same natural inevitability that guides silk from cocoon to thread, thread to fabric, fabric to garment. Your last conscious thought is gratitude for this time spent learning that true luxury lies not in possessing beautiful things, but in developing the sensitivity to recognize beauty wherever it appears and the skill to participate in its creation with hands that understand the sacred nature of work performed with complete attention and genuine love. The workshop grows quiet around your resting form, filled with the presence of silk dreams and the patient wisdom of ancient crafts. While outside, the eternal stars continue their own slow weaving of light patterns across the darkness, connecting this moment to all the moments that have come before and all those yet to unfold in the endless, beautiful tapestry of time.